Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Muzharul Alam. I work for United Nations Environment Program in the regional office of UNEP in the Asia Pacific region in Bangkok. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this session on the risk and the resilience in Southeast Asia. Use the ecosystem-based adaptation as an approach for adaptation and the development, which we are organizing under the Resilience Hub. This session, we will discuss on how communities, the national and the local government, and the partners can deliver the adaptation results by planning, designing, and implementing ecosystem-based adaptation for enhancing the resilience of city, both the ecosystem as well as the people living in the cities. It will focus on the work done through the building the climate resilience of the urban ecosystem through the ecosystem-based adaptation, the project that we call the Asia Pacific region and under the border umbrella of UNEP of the City Adapt the project. This project is supported by the Least Developed Country Fund managed by the Global Environment Facility. And the overall aim of the project is to reduce vulnerability of poor urban communities in Asia Pacific to climate change impacts using the ecosystem-based adaptation approach in the cities in the 4 targeted countries. Today we have the speaker from the 3 countries, and we'll be hearing from them the work that they have done so far and the results they have delivered so far. So in addition to the countries to talk about the results achieved so far, we'll be also hearing from the regional, the technical, the coordinator of the project. I will introduce the speakers one by one, but for all of your information that we have an hour plus time in this session. We have the 4 presenter, and then we will have the Q&A, and we'll be asking the relevant the panel member or Alamgir to respond to that. With that introduction, it's my pleasure to introduce Alamgir Hussain, who joined United Nations Environment Program is basically months plus ago, and serving as a regional technical expert for urban ecosystem-based adaptation projects. He comes with more than 18 years of experiences in the area of the climate change adaptation, the mitigation, natural resource management, energy, etc. He also has experiences working with other countries beyond Bangladesh, for example, Timor-Leste, the Nepal, the Bhutan. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to invite Alamgir to give us an overview of the project and why the ecosystem-based adaptation, particularly in the context of city in Asia and the Pacific, why it is important. Over to you, Alamgir.
Thank you, Babay. Good day, colleagues. As you have already heard, my presentation is basically focused on giving an overview of the Urban EbA Asia project that United Nations Environment Program is implementing in multiple countries of the Asia Pacific region. So let me start by saying, that we are in an urbanized world we are living, and cities are basically our future. And if we have a look at the cities, they're actually driving the economic growth that we are all aspiring for. And cities definitely have the power to change the world. Similarly, Asia Pacific region, this has very recently become majority urban in 2019. Sugar, can you move next? majority urban in 2019 for the first time, and almost 2.3 billion people are living in cities. And this has become the hub of our economic growth for the growth that Asia Pacific is having right now. While these cities are extremely powerful for making the change, these cities are also significantly vulnerable. And the vulnerability to climate change is also very predominant. Almost all are at risk. As you know, that almost 90% of the coastal cities are located at coastal region. In overall Asia Pacific region, we have almost 6 out of 10 most vulnerable nations in the Asia Pacific region. And the annual damage caused by climate-induced disasters is close to $48.7 billion. That says us a lot about the risk that all of us are in together. The people who are involved in different kinds of works, the kind of sectors, and mostly informal sectors, 60% of those sectors are vulnerable to climate change, according to Asian Development Bank. In terms of coastal flooding to, even in terms of emission potential, Asia Pacific is also expected to emit almost 48% of the global greenhouse gas emission by 2030. So putting all of those figures together, cities have the power to change our world. Similarly, cities also are facing significant challenges, and particularly people who are living in urban areas and who are mostly poor urban citizens, they're facing significant challenges. Next. So to do so, the kind of pathways that we're generating for the people who are living in these urban areas, we really need to take a very careful look into how these overall planning processes are being designed and how those are executed. And those will be absolutely critical for us to realize the Sustainable Development Goals that was all agreed in 2015, the new urban agenda adopted in 2016, and the Global Climate Promise through the Paris Agreement. And all of those interventions in the city level, we have different choices. We can go for choices which are completely gray, like infrastructure-based choices. We can go for choices which are green, which are ecosystem-based choices, or a combination of gray and green. And while we are having the decade UN declared by the United Nations as the decade of ecosystem restoration, 2021 to 2030, our work, United Nations Environment Program's work, is mostly focused on nature. Next, please. And under the overall umbrella of nature-based solutions, UNEP's works mostly focuses on ecosystem-based approaches for adaptation, which can be considered as an application of a system-based approach that we are using for increasing resilience or to enhance adaptive capacity of the people to climate change. Next, please. So where do we work? United Nations Environment Program, since 2010, we have more than 50 ecosystem-based adaptation projects in almost 39 countries, with an overall resource envelope of more than $250 million across Asia Pacific, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America and the Caribbean. And in all over in these places, our work is benefiting both the ecosystems as well as the people to better adapt with climate change. However, most of our work so far in ecosystem-based adaptation is mostly focused on rural context, and the urban ecosystem-based projects are relatively very limited. And the project that I'm going to discuss today is part of that project. Next, please. So the City Adapt project, these are two sister projects funded by the Global Environment Facilities Least Developed Countries Fund, exclusively using nature-based solutions for adaptation. So we are working in 3 cities in 3 Latin American countries and 5 cities in 4 of the Asian countries. In Asia Pacific, we are working in Bhutan, Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar. Through the Regional Office of Asia Pacific. Unfortunately, because of the political unrest in Myanmar, our activities are halted in Myanmar right now. Next, please. So where do we work? So in Bhutan, our targeted city is Thimphu. In Myanmar, it was Mandalay. In Laos, we have 2 cities, Phongsalai and Orispi. And in Cambodia, we are working in CAP. Next, please. So what we are trying to do? So in general, in this project, we have three very interlinked components, which has an overarching goal of building climate resilience and adaptive capacity in targeted urban areas. So the first component, which is mostly focused on institutional strengthening and capacity building, we are trying to provide support to the government to better integrate ecosystem-based adaptation into the national planning processes. So we are helping them with the relevant policy briefs and technical guidelines on EbA. We are providing capacity building support to the city administration and providing them with the decision-making tools for EbA integration into development planning and map processes. The second component is mostly focused on EbA intervention demonstration, where we are helping them with preparation of the vulnerability maps and adaptation reports. Then based on those vulnerability maps, we are designing contextualized city-specific EbA interventions and also providing for the urban poor communities ecosystem-based livelihood improvement plans. One of the interesting angle of this project is also we are designing research program with the national scientific institutions in these countries to better monitor the EbA interventions for future. The third component, which is mostly focused on knowledge sharing and awareness raising, is basically built towards performance monitoring of these EbA interventions, city and national level awareness raising and knowledge sharing with an overall ambition for a national upscaling strategy for these countries as well as for other countries of Asia and Pacific. And through so, we hope this project will contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, targeted for very specific goals, as well as the Paris Agreement and the New Urban Agenda. Next, please. So, as we said, we are also significantly focusing on integration of new EbA into the National Adaptation Planning process. As you know, that National Adaptation Planning process is shaping the adaptation actions of different countries around the world. And you know that almost more than 125 countries are involved in the NAP process right now. UN Environment Program itself is supporting more than 18 countries, in addition to the NAP Global Support Program that we have. And in case of, if we stock take the NAP process, you will see that while the vulnerability of ecosystems are quite well covered, the inclusion of EbA measures are quite prominent in most of these national adaptation plans. The connection between EbA directly to vulnerability, the efforts to measure the EbA outcomes, and EbA interventions in case of urban cases are often quite neglected. And this particular project is trying to help to minimize this gap and generate the knowledge base out of that. So in a follow-up presentation, you will learn from Bhutan how we are trying to do that in the context of Bhutan. Next, please. One of the key outcome of this project is to design an urban EbA toolkit that we have designed with our partner, sister UN concern called UN Habitat. And through this toolkit, we are trying to help the city administration to better integrate EbA interventions into their urban planning processes. And that is helping the cities to make the informed decisions and choices about how urban EbA interventions can be implemented in their city context. So one of our experiences from Cambodia will also focus on how this urban EbA toolkit has helped the Cambodian government, especially in case of Kep province, to come up with the EbA interventions. Next, please. And in this toolkit, which we are segregated into 4 different modules, one of the core module is vulnerability and risk assessments. And without proper analysis of vulnerability and risk, it will not be feasible to have the right kind of EbA interventions for us. So we have significantly focused on how the vulnerability and risk assessment can help us and what kind of learning we'll getting from inclusion of city administration into these vulnerability and risk assessments and what kind of challenges and opportunities they are facing. So that will be one of the case studies that will be shared by our colleagues from Lao PDR. So next, please. So based on this overall project, we will be sharing experiences from 3 countries. From Bhutan, we will be using the NAP process for city-level vulnerability assessment, targeting EbA approach. For case of Cambodia, how the EbA tool, urban EbA tool that we have designed have helped the country to prioritize EbA interventions. And in case of Laos, we'll be hearing about the challenges and opportunities of different methods and techniques that we have used during the vulnerability and risk assessments. So that's how the whole session will, rest of the session will help you to better understand the project. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alamgir, for sharing the overall objectives of the project, particularly highlighting the 2 points that I'd like to just mention here before I hand over to our country colleague to share the real experiences from the ground. The one is, this is a new area in terms of the ecosystem-based adaptation approach to apply in a city level or at the city context. The second important element, what Alamgir, you have also mentioned, that it is not only the designing the intervention using the science, but also how to integrate the ecosystem-based adaptation approaches in the city planning and implementing the ecosystem-based as a part of the development of the city itself. So with that, it's my great pleasure to invite Sri Sukhdara, who is the national technical expert for the urban ecosystem-based adaptation project in Cambodia. Mr. Sukhdara has vast experiences in the field of climate change and the national the policy planning. Before joining the urban ecosystem-based adaptation project, Mr. Sukhdara has held the position of the national coordinator for the project named Reducing the Vulnerability of Cambodia Rural Livelihood through enhanced the subnational the climate change planning and execution of the priority action that's implemented by the General Secretariat of the National Council for Sustainable Development. So he comes with that background where he has already involved in reducing the vulnerability, but we'll be hearing from Sri about this project and how they have used the tools and what is the result and the learning. So over to you, Sri.
Thanks so much, Alam, for the introduction, and very good morning from Cambodia to colleague and the participants. My name is Sukhdara from Cambodia. So our presentation today will talk about our prioritization of the EbA intervention in Kai province. Next slide, please. So this slide show you the overview of Cambodia and of course Kai province. Kai is the smallest province located in the southern part of Cambodia, with a population of around only 41,000 people. And throughout our assessment, we have found out that there are several key stakeholders for the project in Cambodia. The first one is the Ministry of Environment, which is the leading actor for this project. And we have identified Kai Provincial Hall, Kai Municipality and local authorities. And we have the Provincial Department of Environment, which is a branch of the Ministry of Environment in Kai Province. Provincial Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, the Department of Public Works and Transport, and Department of Land Management, Urban Planning and Construction. And for many years, Kai Province has encountered several main climate hazards, including drought, especially during the dry season, and also floodings and storm occurring more frequent in recent years because of the climate change. Lightning is also one of the accident that cause fatality, fatality in our coastal area, and increasing in the temperatures, especially in the rural area like Kai, people are not really well equipped, to adapt themselves to the high temperature. Saltwater intrusions, because most of the people live in the cap city are farmer and fishermen, so the occurrence of saltwater intrusion can really affect their livelihood a lot. And the last one is the sea level rise, which also impacts the infrastructure and the coastal environment. In addition to the climate hazard, the city also faces the urban challenges. Importantly, is the rapid urbanization. From now, recently, the increase of the urban planning is happening a lot in Cap, even though it's not like other provinces. And also, people are moving to live in a coastal area, but the access to services are still the same, which is not really much with the rapid urban development. And also, the Cap city has more and more people coming. Recently, the rank number 1 in terms of the province that attract the most tourists in Cambodia. And because of the waste management and other issue, we could find that poor health and the hygiene condition is one of the main problems in Cap city. We have identified several ecosystems that are important for this small province. The first one is the terrestrial forest, which already exists there, the fishery resources, mangroves, seagrasses, coral reef, and one protected area inside the province, in the middle of the province. And in addition to this, our city and our province also receive pressure like the waste management, which is not really effective yet, and the uncoordinated urban planning and development that are not working well among the stakeholders. So they need to really work together to see which coordinating and planning should be taken place. And health diseases happen because of the waste management, I believe. And the last one is more and more population coming to this small province that affects many other issues, environment and facility. Next slide, please. So because in Cambodia, we already conducted the VA assessment, and we have proposed several solutions. The first one is the restoration and rehabilitation of mangrove forests along the coastline of the province in order to provide, resources. For example, crab, because in Gai we have a crab bank, and also to protect the river bank. Second one is the restoration and reconstruction of Pohin Dam. It was an old dam, but it was damaged during the war, and it is very big. And if we can restore this dam, we can collect fresh water and support the entire city in Gai. And also we look at the integrated watershed management of the forest ecosystem, which are originating from the hilly area of Gai province, and also the Gai city wastewater treatment and management, because if we could not manage the wastewater very well, it will pollute the city, which attract tourists, and also bring harms to the health of the public. And we also look at the protection and rehabilitation of seagrass bed and integrate the urban land use planning among the stakeholders. Make sure that we use the land that are not really affects the remaining or existing ecosystem. Next slide, please. So how do we prioritize our adaptation options? So first, after the assessment, we do the short listing of the adaptation option. And second one, we hold the workshop, we call consultation workshop, with the head of province, municipality, commune, and villagers together to ask we should implement the next module C, which is right for us, because after the VA assessment, we look at the objective setting and decision making. So in this training and the module of Cambodia, we look at the adaptation strategy. So what strategy we are going to implement, whether we go for natural or hybrid or just build a strategy. So for Cambodia, mostly we look at the hybrid one, the combination of the ecosystem and the hard engineering intervention. So we can kind of mix the nature and the important ecosystem in our country, like mangrove or shed forest, cigarette, and coral reef. So we try to look how the strategy implemented and the option implemented really impact the important ecosystem, or how it really help the remaining ecosystem. And we also look at how we select the hard and gray engineering, like sea dive, drainage system, or water treatment plant and pond construction, etc. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Okay, and moving on, we look at the multi-criteria analysis, especially the cost-benefit analysis, because you know that intervention options are not really cheap, right? Some really need to invest a lot of money, but the benefit might be not really a lot. Okay, so we have to consider if the amount of money we spend on specific intervention option really bring the benefit you want or not. So the cost benefit analysis for now for Cambodia is really important, and we do that based on the data we collected from the VA assessment, especially the socio-economic data. And one thing that we are concerned is with the valuation of the ecosystem service in the country, because usually we look at the immediate service. For example, if we build a dam, we expect to have like for example water, right? But actually ecosystem can provide more services. Based on our training, we can see that one ecosystem can provide like 4 types of services. Like the first one, regulating service, like it can have regulating the function of the ecosystem, like holding our soil, okay, avoiding erosions, or it can provide the provisioning services like food, timber, okay, fuel, or water, for example. And some ecosystem also provide the cultural and recreational services like spiritual experience, leisure activity, for example. And last, it can also support other services or other ecosystem surrounding it as well. So the last part is that we have to also look at the loss and damage data. So in Cambodia, we have the Cambodian disaster damage and loss information system. So why the loss and damage data is important? But we look back in the history, like for example, in Kai Province, where or which areas are prone to damage, are prone to disaster. So this area, the priority as well, you know, for us. So if our implementation action really fits with the historical data, we can find that we are doing a great job in preventing the future prone area from happening. And for now, okay, and the next step for Cambodia, we already have our intervention option in line. We have to build a bit more concrete of the plan, and then we can implement those demonstration or intervention option. Okay, and I think that should be all for my presentation. And thanks so much, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sogdara, for sharing the experiences from your country, particularly focusing on the cities in Cambodia. Before I invite the colleague from the Laos to share the experiences, I would like to just mention one particular point, as you have highlighted, in terms of the valuation of the ecosystem-based adaptation and the benefits that we'll able to get from that interventions. Now, if we just look into the hard or engineering intervention, the investment is obviously high, and we'll get immediate benefit. There is no doubt that we'll not get any benefit from that infrastructure development. But if we look into the next 30 years, the infrastructure over 30 years will decay, and it will require the maintenance. Against, if we look into the ecosystem-based adaptation approach and the intervention, we'll not get the immediate benefit. But if we look into 30 years, the ecosystem will start providing the services. So this is in a completely the two dimension. One is getting the immediate benefit, but over time you need more money to invest to maintain that benefit to continue. Where in the ecosystem-based adaptation, you'll not able to get the immediate benefit, but if you allow a certain time, then the nature will start providing the services and it will sustain. I think that is the way we need to look into when we compare the engineering solution or the hard solution and the ecosystem. And in many places, as you rightly mentioned, that we need to bring both the engineering and the nature together so that we are able to receive the benefit for a longer period of time. So with that, I would like to now, my pleasure to invite Vilakon. He is the project manager for these projects that we are talking about. He has a degree on the civil engineering from the National University of Laos, from the Faculty of Engineering and the Architecture. He also has the master's degree in the science of the environmental, the engineering, and the management. So he will be sharing the experiences from Laos from this the project. So over to you, Vilakon.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Babu. Good morning, everyone. Good morning from Vientiane, Laos, PDA. My name is Vilakon Manipusai from the Department of Climate Change, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. It's an honor to be a speaker today. As mentioned earlier by the Alamkia and Mr. Babu, today's topics for me is challenges and opportunities in using the EbA option inside and Phong Sa Ly district in Laos. Next slide, please. This is the today topics. I'm gonna present the overviews and methodology for vulnerability assessment, findings, and EbA option development. Next slide. It's overview. Yes, as we are aware, climate change is a global concern and is affecting all sectors, namely agriculture, water resources, health and life assets, and vulnerable people is especially who are dependent on natural resources like biodiversity, ecosystem services, or food. And we all aware that a healthy ecosystem play an important role, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Babu, is may help people to adapt to climate change in the long run. Next slide, please. On the map, you may see Laos PDA is a landlocked country surrounded by China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. And the two red spots is our two target cities. The top one is Phong Sa Ly district, and the lower one is Sai districts. And when we compare the area of those two districts is not so much different. However, the other numbers like population inside district is almost 4 times greater than Phong Sa Ly. Next slide. For the methodologies, yes, as according to the assessment report number 4 of IPCC, the vulnerability assessment concept is shown as the figures, and we apply this concept to do vulnerability in our target city in our projects, and this figure shows us the 3 main components like exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacities. Slides. And we adopted those concepts into these as 3 main components have the same weight. That means all of them are equally important. Next slide, please. And we also apply these these formulas to calculate vulnerability index, as we have three main components, as I mentioned earlier, and each component has several indicators with different units. Thus, we do normalization, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. This is some indicators to determine the exposures, like cyclone, drought, blast, and change mean max temperatures and change precipitations. Next. And this is some key indicators for determining the adaptive capacity in the areas. Like we are looking for the road density, electric coverage, and water sources and facility available. Next slide, please. And this is some indicators to determine the sensitivity level in the villages, like we look for the dependence ratio or population density and so on. Next slide, please. Findings. Next, I will present some findings in Hongsali. This is the map of precipitation, minimum temperature, and maximum temperatures by using the climate models and GS technique. We generate this map, and this shows us the precipitations. As we can see, its ranges around 117 to 120 millimeters, and the southern and southeastern part of this area has greater rainfall compared to the western areas. And for the minimum temperatures, we can see that most of the villages in the east has more minimum temperatures rather than the west. Next slide, please. This is the map that shows our sensitivities, exposure, and adaptive capacity. As we can see that the sensitivities, most villages located in the northeastern, southeastern are most sensitive, whereas the villages in the middle part of the district had a medium and low level. On the other hand, the exposures, we can see that the villages in the northwestern part are highly exposed, whereas the adaptive capacity, we clearly see that the villages in the urban area have very high adaptive capacity. Next slide, please. When we compile all three components, we derive the vulnerability index maps like this. We can see that the villages in the northwestern and the middle western part of the district are most vulnerable, whereas in the village in the urban area have lower vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. For Sai district findings, yes, for Sai district, we can see the precipitation. Most the villages in the eastern area have more rainfall, as you can see here. And for the minimum temperatures, we can see that the western and eastern area have a higher minimum temperatures than the other areas. And maximum temperatures, villages in the western area have highest maximum temperatures. Next slide, please. This is sensitivity and exposure and adaptive capacity maps. And for sensitivity, is clearly to say that most villages have a medium to very high sensitivity levels. and few villages in the urban area. The urban area is inside the circle blue, have a very low sensitivities. For exposures, the villages in the north and western part of the district are high exposed. And for adaptive capacities, the villages in the urban zone have a high level of adaptive capacities, whereas the villages in the western part have a moderate level of adaptive capacity. Next slide, please. Yes, yeah, for the vulnerability maps of site district, it's clearly say that villages in the northwestern and eastern part are the most vulnerable, and the villages in the urban area have a lower level of vulnerability. Next slide, please. For the EbA option developments, after we clearly see the vulnerability maps of those two districts, we running the intervention selection, or by we conduct a series of consultation, workshop, and meetings with concerned authorities in two districts, both in person and also virtual meetings. And we also apply the participatory approach and multi-criteria selections for the site and EbA intervention selections as well. And for the key criteria for making decision, we are looking for the number of beneficiaries, and we also looking for how these interventions are in line with the EbA concept. And we also look for, does it support the district or provincial socio-economic development plans or not? And does it acceptable by the local communities? And this is the key criteria for making decisions. Next slide, please. And this is an initial intervention list for Pongsali. I will mention some, like introduction vegetation cover to prevent landslide in the urban area. And next one is establishing community-based water source restoration project to increase water supply in the dry season. And of course, raising awareness campaigns. Next slide, please. This one is the initial list of intervention inside districts. Of course, all the lists are mentioned on planting trees along the road or the riverbank to prevent the landslide or erosions, and community-based watershed restoration. And here they would like to introduce ecotourism along the riverbank as well. Next slide, please. After we conduct the data collection as well as the vulnerability assessment, we found key challenges in those cities. Like the data set is also challenging for the statistical, spatial, and climate data is critical because it is limited census data for the village level, because some data do not record in the village level, namely disaster events or loss of academic from the disaster and so on. One more thing about the data is about the unsystematic data record, and also its different data platform. We found that some data is still in hard copy or on paper, and some spatial data is unprojected when we try to to an overlay analysis by the GIS technique. And the next one is the communications. As in the northern part area, like Pungsali and Sai district, the diversity of the ethnic groups and their original languages is really challenging for the communications, especially for me. And we also found that the climate change and ecosystem-based adaptation are the concept, and the local people and also me has get difficult to. And some people, they understand that climate change projection is the same with the weather forecast. The next one is a confessing of the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation as well. Yes, and for the limitations, funding is available. That means funding is available for implementation, but not might be available for the long-term maintenance. As climate change adaptation, we focus on reducing the impact from the climate change hazard for a long run. Thus, the secure fund for EbA intervention might be needed to be addressed. And yes, for the EbA guidelines as well, because after we do piloting of the EbA, and this effort should now be undertaken to develop officially guidelines on the EbA and formally endorsed by the government to roll out nationally standards for the EbA. I think that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilakon, for sharing the whole vulnerability exercise plus the prioritization exercise, as well as sharing the challenges and what you mentioned. And I was smiling that when we are presenting the climate change projection to the local community or the people, they thought about that this is the same as the weather forecast. And this is where I strongly feel that we need to work more and raise the awareness so that people understand the differences between the weather forecast and the climate change. So before I move to our third country, I also would like to request the participants, if you have any question, please use the chat box. We'll be using the chat box and we'll try our best to respond to your question. As I mentioned that we'll be hearing on the third country of the project, but hearing the two country presentation, I already have two questions for two of them. I'm just giving them heads up so that they can prepare. So Mr. Sugdara, you talked about the restoration and reconstruction of one of the dam. So maybe it would be good later on, once we hear from our Bhutan example, that how you are considering bringing both the hard and the soft, that we call the gray-green type of the approach when you are thinking about that reconstruction of the damaged dam. And for Bilakon, you talked about the whole exercise, and in terms of the vulnerability matrix, you have mentioned that if we look into the central part of the city or the urban area, the overall, using the sensitivity, exposure, and the adaptive capacity, their vulnerability is relatively lower than the other parts of the area. So my question to you is that, is it due to that we are looking into only the current vulnerability, not looking into the future vulnerability because of many other challenges or the limitation? Or have we missed anything that where the urban people, their income is coming, and whether those income sources are also going to be vulnerable in future, but we didn't able to bring in the whole vulnerability exercise? So I'm just giving you two of you the heads up. So prepare yourself for a quick response. Maybe we'll be receiving also the question from the participants through the chat. So with that, now it's my pleasure to invite Jarwan Kunpor to share the experience and the work happening in Bhutan. I'm very sorry that Karma Chapel, who is actually managing the project and supposed to be with us today to share the experiences, but due to the health reason, he's not available. But thank you, Kunpor, for stepping in at the very last minute. I know it is not very easy things to take up, but I really appreciate you to take the challenge and sharing the experiences and the work happening in Bhutan. So over to you, Kunpor.
Thank you so much, Kun Babu. And thank you so much, colleague. So we've learned a lot from other countries already about ecosystem-based adaptation and also the climate trends. So it is also my honor to share some information with you or experiences from Bhutan. And if you have any questions, I'm sure that we will come back with more information on that as well. So let's start. So yeah, today we have discussed with our countries to share the experience. And in Bhutan, I'm very, very happy to hear that the country itself is right now conducting the National Adaptation Plan. And I think that we think that this is going to be very interesting and useful for other countries as well to share the experience. So today we are going to talk about the National Adaptation Planning or the NAP process in the city level vulnerability assessment. Next, please. So as my colleague and also other colleagues from the country also mentioned about the pilot site. So in Bhutan, we also have our city level implementation plan. So we work in Thimphu. So in the map here, you can see that Thimphu is actually located in the mountainous area. And Bhutan is also a very beautiful country. And today we can look into what is going on there and what is the development trend and what kind of ecosystems can play the role in Thimphu. Next, please. So in here, you can see the general information about Thimphu. You can see that here that there are so many housing in the urban settlement in Thimphu itself. So the population is rising right now. Currently in 2017, we have the population about 114, and it's getting higher and higher, which is quite similar and having the same trend with other countries in the Asia Pacific here. And also the country itself is mountainous, so it's located in the high altitude. And also I think right now, most of the countries and also in the urban settlements, they're also facing the problem with the waste problems. So in Thimphu itself, the city generates about 51 tons of waste per day. And in the city itself, you can see that it has its own urban development plan. So the current plan they're implementing right now is the Strategic Environmental Assessment of Thimphu Structural Plan, which was conducted in 2018. Next, please. So here is very interesting picture. I think it's happening all over the world. That you can see that in the 60s, you can see only like few housing and early farming in the area of Thimphu Thomdi. And moving on, just 40 years later, in year 2000, there's like a lot of housing happening. And 12 years later, there's you can see that we can hardly see the empty space, and there are so many housing, urban settlements in this area. So this is very, very, I would say impressive development at some points, but it's happening very, very fast. And is a very, very good observation. I think this development is also happening to other countries as well. Next, please. So here you can see that I was talking about the rising of the population trend. So in Thimphu, you can see from 2005 to 2021 that the trend is rising very, very, very quickly compared to the previous almost in the 80s. the number is rising gradually, but in the last 3 pillars that you can see starting from 2005 to 2021, that the number is rising so quickly, and people are moving to the city very, very quickly. And this is very, very interesting and very related to the picture that we've seen earlier about the infrastructure that being built in the city. Next, please. So here you can see the threats which we are going to talk about starting from the non-climatic. So you can see that in the urban settings, the stress on urban ecosystems, the poverty, limited infrastructure, because I think this is also very common in the urban area. When we talked about the space, we want to implement some parks, we want to increase the green space, but it's also always the problem that we have the limited space or limited infrastructure for this. Also, we are facing the limited water resources and natural disasters. Especially in Thimphu, it's interesting that they are vulnerable to the flash floods, storm water, drainage flooding, and urban forest fires. So these urban forest fires, I don't think that is very common in other areas. So it is good to learn about these problems in Thimphu and how they could deal with it. And also the next problem could be related to health. And as I mentioned before, this is a big problem in urban settlement, and we have to look into the waste management process as well. Next, please. And now, when it's related to the climatic threats, you can see in Thimphu or in Bhutan that the temperature increase is trending around 0.5 to 2 degrees by 2030, and it could happen or rise up to 7 degrees by 2070. And on the right-hand side, you can see the vulnerabilities that happens in the countries and in the cities, starting from the water. And because of the rising temperature, it increased the evaporation rates of the water resources, which also affects the health because of the increased temperature. Also, affect the health of the children and also the elderly, because they are prone to dehydration and health strokes. Also, that you can see not only the increased temperature, but there's increased intensity of the rainfall. And we also talked about this, that because it's the city itself, it's in the mountainous area, and one of the threats is a flood, and a flash flood in the city. Then the next one, very interesting. When you have this risk of flooding, you also are facing the risk of water scarcity or reduced water, also winter rainfall. Winter rainfall is one of the sources of the water resources of the Thimphu. So if they are having late rainfall and they are facing the water scarcity in the city as well. So you can see here that there are a number of vulnerabilities related to this reduced winter rainfall, water, food, and also it affects the health of the people. Next, please. So as we are going to discuss about the NAP process for Bhutan. So for the NAP process, actually starting from the NAPA, or the National Adaptation Program of Action. So this NAPA was actually conducted in 2006. And in NAPA plan, there is like 9 adaptation priority projects. I'm not going to go into details in these, but just maybe pick 1 or 2 important points. So in NAPA, they focus on disaster strategy, also the flood protection, water management, and also rainwater harvesting. And yeah, this is also, like I said earlier, interesting. It's about the community-based forest fire management and prevention. So it is noted here that 3 of the 9 projects were implemented under the NAPA. Next, please. So starting from the 2006, in 2012, there's updates the plan by integrating the adaptation into it. So these are NAPA projects. So you can see that there are 8 priority projects here. You can see the they also focus on the climate resilience, disaster risk reduction, community-based food security, and the forest fire is still here. So it is very, very important for the country to look into this problem and find a solution. Next, please. So this brings us to our plan right now, that you can see that in the recent plan of the Bhutan, there are like 10 priority adaptation needs. So I'm not going to go into details in these as well, but you can see that after 2 times of the plan development starting from NAPA, so moving towards to the NAP process. So the country also identified like 10 priority adaptation needs. And here you can see that they are start talking about the urban area, for example, integrate climate resilience and low emission strategies in urban and rural settlements. So the urban is playing quite important role for Bhutan. And you can see that the climate resilience is well integrated into the national plan, and that brings us to the NAP process, which I'm going to talk about in the next next slide, please. So here we are right now, like I mentioned earlier, that the NAP process is being conducted in Bhutan for the whole country. So you can see here that starting from NAPA, so they bring in the priority, the adaptation priority into the NAP process. So the NAP process is already started for the whole country, and they expect it to complete it within this year. And also there are 5 priorities that they are looking at, starting from water, agriculture, forest and biodiversity, and health. Next, please. And this is very interesting that the NAP process, so also looking into the ecosystem-based adaptation components. So here, the findings are very interesting to see that in 2013, there is a suggestion for the local development plans about the need to conduct the vulnerability assessments and also mapping the exercise to identify key areas of risk of climate change. And because of this study, there is very interesting that there is limited awareness of the vulnerabilities, adaptive capacities, and the sensitivities to climate change impacts. I think Khun Babul already mentioned that it's interesting to hear from the local people. Climate change can be interpreted into the weather change. So with this low awareness of the people in Bhutan, it is, I think, very important to find out what kind of vulnerabilities are, what kind of adaptive capacity they are having, and also what kind of sensitivities to climate change that they are having right now. So with this urban EbA Asia project, INFO is building climate resilience to urban systems through ecosystem-based adaptation in the Asia Pacific region. We are very happy that we are part of the development, that we are going to conduct the vulnerability assessments in the country together with the local government, and we are looking into the terms and the problems and the status that I mentioned earlier. Next, please. So with this vulnerability assessments of inputs from like I mentioned earlier, the NAP process is being conducted for the whole country. So now we use a climate lens to look into the inputs from this city. So we find the vulnerabilities in the city itself. So in Thimphu, what kind of methodology, strategy, I will talk about that later. But right now, the objective of this vulnerability assessment is to use this to look into the updated climate models, what the status of socioeconomic vulnerabilities, and also what kind of ecosystem base that's actually existing in the city and can be the people can benefit from these ecosystem services from the urban area. The second one is to build climate resilience through the ecosystem-based adaptation to provide solution adaptation options, for example. And the last one is to protect climate hazard prones, and also to help people with lower income to benefit from the urban ecosystem services. Next, please. So here is the process. I'm not going to go into details.
Yeah,
but
no, I was about to request you maybe in next 2 minutes or maximum
Okay.
3 if we can wrap up. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So here, like I said earlier, the process starting from the data collection, accessing the data, and also going through all of the process that we are going to have the findings from this vulnerability assessment. Next, please. So the methodology, I think is quite similar to other countries as well. They're starting from getting the data from the survey, starting from work from the base research to get all of the needed data to find the answers for these for the findings for the vulnerability assessment. Next, please. So here I already mentioned that. So we talked about the climate hazards, exposure, vulnerability, adaptive capacity, and sensitivity. So these elements are very important when we doing this vulnerability assessment. And I heard that we are going to find the solutions for Thimphu, and that we have the opportunity to integrate the EbA approach in the city. Next, please. So here, I think this is the last one. With the methodology, I think the most important thing that we have to look into is a stakeholder consultation and engagement. Because here, our Bhutan colleague talked about the non-government or the government partners. I think there are so many important partners, stakeholders that we have to engage in order to make sure that nobody is left behind and everybody is well aware of the climate change impacts, and also well aware of the benefit of ecosystem-based adaptation that they can benefit to reduce this climate change impacts. Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Khun Phor, for stepping in and sharing the work currently going on. I just would like to mention 2 things before I check whether we have any question through the chat box. 2 things. I think the photographs that you have shown as a part of the presentation, they speak itself in terms of the growth and its rapidness. The 40 years versus the 12 years, if you just see that time frame. The second one is the leveraging what is already happening and making use of that, particularly understanding the vulnerability and zooming in into the city level, following the national adaptation, the plan exercises going on. I think this is also important that we also need to look for leveraging our work, not only understanding it, but also when we are looking into implementing interventions, how we can also leverage what is already going to happen as a part of the development plan or exercise. So we need to move also from the assessment and understanding that leveraging what is happening, but also integrating into the development, the exercise. So with that, the comments. So let me go first with Mr. Sugdara. If you can kindly share maybe in a minute or 2 minutes my question. Yes, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much for the question, of course. So your question is how we can integrate the gray infrastructure and our urban EbA, project, like green project together, like gray-green project. So for your information regarding the proposed intervention for the Po Hein Dam, so the dam is already a gray infrastructure, as we know, and we're not really going to build a dam that provide electricity. No, we're just trying to convert the dam into like a reservoir to store fresh water to support the city, the people. Okay, so from what we see is that when we restore the dam, it will not affect the surrounding ecosystem. One thing is that the dam was already an existing dam, so we don't clear the forest in order to build it. Second, we can see that we will only restore a particular section of the dam, not the whole entire dam itself. And I can assure that some trees grow after the dam was completed, because many years already. So if you go, you have opportunity or can watch the video from our side, you can see that dam is located in the World Lake, surrounded by the mountain. So what are the benefits that we can have from restoring this dam? First, we can store water, as mentioned, for the city and also for the area, the surrounding area. Because as I mentioned earlier, one of the climate hazards that the Cape experience is droughts. So in dry season, sometimes we could not find a water source. So with the dam or the reservoir restored, we can store the water for people and also for the surrounding ecosystem. Second, with the dam, we can also regulate the flow of water. So I also mentioned that the flooding also one of the climate hazard in Cape. So if we can build the reservoir, we can regulate the water flow to a certain level that it will not actually push or damage the downstream, like a landslide or erosion and flooding the surrounding area. So for us, this is an opportunity that we can actually combine both gray and green, preserving the remaining gray infrastructure. Yeah, but having the green one.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that if you present it the way you are presenting it right now, I think the people will understand. The word the dam is basically sometime creating the unnecessary confusion. But if we present it like we are increasing the retention capacity so that we reduce the flooding risk, we provide the water during the dry season, that will bring the exact story of the ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. So with that, we have very limited time, but Vilakon, if you just take 1 minute maximum to just respond my question.
Okay, I will try my best. Thank you, Babu. Yes, for the vulnerability assessment, we also include the the features parameters like we do for the exposure, as we extract the climate data that we from the IPCC that they run till 2000, and yes, for maximum and minimum temperatures and precipitations indicators, we mainly use the climate model with the two scenarios, RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. And these changes are subtracted from the projection and with the historical. This projection is extracted from the climate model, as I mentioned earlier, and from the year 2021, 2050, whereas the historical or the base year is extracted from the climate model as well, but from the year 1976 to 2005. And this is just the futures parameter that we can look for from the climate model. I hope this explanation will respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you. I have just checked whether we have additional question. I haven't seen any additional questions from any participants. That gives me the impression that all three of you, including Alamgir, about the projects, you have made it very clear what we are doing, where we stand right now, and what is going to be our next area of the work. So with that, from my side, from United Nations Environment Program, I would like to thank all the speakers who joined this session under the Resilience Hub as a part of the COP26, which is happening right now in Glasgow. And many of you have heard about the action necessary right now. It is not only that talking about what we need to do, but we need to act now. And this project is particularly aiming to deliver the action at the local level reducing the vulnerability of the people, enhancing the adaptive capacity through ecosystem-based adaptation approach. So you are actually the project and the people taking action on the ground to reduce the vulnerability. With that, I'd like to also thank the Asian Development Bank, who is actually providing the platform to carry out this, the Resilience Hub, the side event as a part of the COP26. So with that, I'd like to conclude our session here and thanking you all once again, and stay safe, stay well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.